The day I received the divorce papers, my husband froze all my assets. He must have wanted to see me on the street, but he had no idea that for 8 years I had been meticulously preparing for his empty-handed exit. Do you think this is one of those predictable stories where, after the divorce, I end up on the sidewalk crying, begging, and tasting endless humiliation? You're wrong. This is a story about a trap I patiently wove thread by thread over 8 years. Today is the day I use my own hands to tighten that trap and nail shut the coffin of the man who fancied himself a king. The day we signed the papers, he was in such a hurry that the moment we stepped out of the notary's office, he was on the phone with his bank's wealth manager, instructing them to freeze every account connected to me. He wanted to see me on my knees. He wanted to hear me beg. He wanted to shudder with pleasure at the sight of me without a single penny to my name. He smiled. It was the smile of a man accustomed to treating his wife as a shadow. He laughed at how foolish I was, how I had nothing besides him. But he didn't know. From the first day I set foot in that house, I had practiced living like someone who would one day leave. I learned to smile when I was ignored, to remain silent when I was humiliated, to nod when I was controlled. And most importantly, I learned how to hide myself beneath the mask of a perfect homemaker growing just strong enough to strike his heart, and then when the time was right to counterattack without a single miscalculation. My name is Evelyn Reed. Today is the day Julian Croft and I are finalizing our divorce at the county clerk's office. Before leaving the penthouse overlooking Central Park, I paused for a moment to look around one last time. For 7 years there, I walked on the cold marble floors, as if on thin ice. The apartment was breathtakingly beautiful, but everything glittered without warmth. There was no regret. Instead, what I felt was liberation. A lightness as if a necklace that had been tightening around my throat for a long time had finally been unclasped. Julian Croft was already sitting in the back of a black luxury sedan. The window was only halfway down as if to maintain a distance. He wore a gray bespoke suit, a high-end watch gleaming on his wrist. His handsome appearance, which I was once so proud of now, looked like nothing more than a hollow shell. "What are you doing just standing there?" he snapped impatiently. "Get in. I have a meeting before 10. Without a word, I opened the car door and slid in. The air inside was so cold you could imagine the windows frosting over with a single breath. The driver, Mr. Henderson, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. I was all too familiar with that look of pity. People pitied me because they thought I was the loser. 32 years old, a homemaker for 7 years. No career, no money, no connections. The kind of woman who, if her husband kicked her out, would be left on the street. It's the story society tells women to scare them into submission. The car stopped in front of the courthouse. Julian walked hastily like a man who feared losing control if he was a minute late. I followed behind him, my steps strangely calm and steady. The entire process was swift, and the documents were stamped. 2 thin, red-stamped copies, yet as heavy as a lifetime of humiliation. Before I could even get my copy in my hand, Julian's lips curled into the first and only smile of the day. "Evelyn," he said slowly, as if bestowing a great favor. "For old time's sake, I won't leave you completely destitute." He slipped his copy into his briefcase and then looked straight at my face, determined to enjoy my reaction. "Your supplementary Amex was canceled as of yesterday. All the payment apps on your phone have been disconnected too." "Oh, right, you don't have a salary," he sneered. "That debit card I used to give you an allowance on, I've frozen that too." I lifted my head, widened my eyes just enough, and put on an expression of someone about to collapse, my voice catching in my throat. "Julian, what is this?" He was satisfied. He leaned in, lowering his voice, but every single word was crystal clear. "From this moment on, you don't have a cent to your name. I've had the locks on the penthouse changed, and I had the housekeeper pack all your things. They're with the doorman. Oh, and your parents' place? Out in Jersey, I heard your brother's business went under 6 months ago and they co-signed the loan. The bank's been calling them nonstop, right?" He scrutinized me as if watching a play. "How are you going to live now? Sleep under a bridge, go crying to your parents and beg for scraps while reminiscing about the old days, kneel and beg. Who knows, maybe I'll feel generous and give you a few bucks for a month's rent on a rundown studio." His voice was filled with a cruel pleasure. A clerk nearby looked up. Their gaze was a strange mix of curiosity, disgust, and pity. I felt my hands holding the red-stamped document begin to tremble. My nails dug into my palms, leaving white crescents. Julian thought it was from fear, but he was wrong. I was biting my lip to keep from bursting out laughing. 8 years, Julian. You haven't changed at all. Still finding amusement in grinding someone under your heel and then asking if it hurts. I took a deep breath and lowered my eyes, letting tears well up at the perfect moment. I acted with the emotions I had genuinely felt for the past few years. It was easy. Did you really have to do this? I said, my voice choked with emotion. He scoffed. Do this. I'm teaching you a lesson about reality, Evelyn. The reality that without me, you are nothing. He waved his hand as if shooing away a fly. Get lost. Get out of my sight. He turned his back. That firm, quick retreat was like someone who had just thrown out a bag of trash and felt unburdened. I stood still and watched the car drive away. As its taillights disappeared around the corner, the victim's expression that had clouded my face vanished as if I had taken off a mask. I raised a hand and wiped a single tear from the corner of my eye. It was a tear I had squeezed out, not one of pain. I opened the handbag I'd carried for 5 years, and from a hidden pocket in the lining pulled out an old phone. It was an old, scratched flip phone, the kind no one would look at twice. I pressed a speed dial key, and before the first ring finished, the other end picked up. It was a young, concise woman's voice. Evelyn, how did it go? Just as we planned, I answered calmly. He's blocked everything from his end. I looked down at the red document in my hand, then glanced in the direction Julian had disappeared and smiled. Perfect. I paused for a moment then, as if christening a storm, I said, let's begin. Activate Project Typhoon. Notify everyone involved. Everything has to move in perfect sync. I hung up and put the old phone back deep inside my bag. Behind me, people still believed I was a pitiful woman kicked out of her home. But I had just pressed the start button on a shredder, and standing right in the middle of it was Julian Croft. Leaving the courthouse, I didn't hail a cab. I walked on purpose. The morning sky over New York was already beating down with hot sunlight. I pulled the brim of my hat down low. I let people see a woman freshly divorced and penniless lost in the vast city, feeling the sweat trickle down her back. The passing glances were a mixture of pity, curiosity, and indifference. I needed all of it. I had to make this entire city believe I had hit rock bottom. I walked to a corner bus stop and sat on the metal bench. When I opened my palm, there were only a few crumpled bills and some coins. $20, maybe 10. And the coins. Perfect props for this play of poverty. I deliberately counted the money again, making sure the person next to me could see. A woman selling lottery tickets looked at me and sighed. Tough breakup, huh, sweetie? She asked in a low voice. I nodded, letting my eyes get appropriately red. It'll pass. Just gotta hang in there. I smiled and said, thank you. I'd been hearing words of comfort like that for 7 years. Every time Julian humiliated me in front of his relatives, I heard them. I was so used to it that I knew exactly how low to bow my head to avoid further questions. A bus arrived. I paid in cash, went to the very back, and sat down. The smell of people exhausts the city itself, all mixed together. In my mind, the milestones of my plan lit up like traffic lights. The clock had started ticking the moment Julian froze my accounts. In 3 hours, his company's finance team would receive their liquidity report. In 6 hours, a major client from upstate would call about a disruption in the cash flow. In 24 hours, rumors would begin to spread among his investors. I didn't need to rush. I just needed to not be late. The bus stopped at the end of the line. I got off pulling an old suitcase I had prepared a week ago. Inside were just a few simple clothes, a pair of flats, and a couple of thin notebooks. I turned into a small alley. Flickering signs, shabby diners, auto repair shops, and tightly packed SROs. This was what people called the city's underbelly. Cramped and noisy, but it guaranteed anonymity. And anonymity was what I needed. My room was on the 2nd floor. The stairs were narrow, the railing rusted. The building superintendent opened the door and looked me up and down. Just you. Deposit is 1 month's rent. Room, small bathrooms shared. I nodded and handed him the cash. The super looked at the few bills, sighed, and said, all right, let me know if you need anything. When the door closed, the empty room contained only a metal bed frame, an old fan, and a single yellowing light bulb. I put down my suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed. The sound of cars drifted in from the alley outside. I sat still for 5, then 10 minutes, just in case anyone was watching me to give them enough time to report that I had checked into a rundown SRO. I took another phone from the bottom of my suitcase. This one was slim, the battery full, the signal strong. I called Maya, one of only 2 people who knew the entire structure of the plan. Report. Just as you predicted, he's blocked everything. But don't worry. The 3 backup accounts under the Shell Corporation's name are operating normally. The funds are secure. Good. What about the upstate client? They just sent an email inquiring about this week's payment. Don't reply. Let them get nervous. I hung up. To rush is to die. That evening, I bought a $5 meal from a street cart at the entrance of the alley. I paid with change. The owner looked at me with pity and added a little extra sauce. I went back to my room and ate slowly. I opened the window, letting in the light from the street lamp. I needed these small details to cultivate the story of my poverty. The cheap meal, the yellow light, a photo of the peeling wallpaper, everything would be used at the right time and place. At 9 p.m., the old flip phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Heard a rumor you're out on the street. I knew who it was. Susan, the wife of one of Julian's closest business associates. A woman who loved to spread gossip. I replied shortly. Yeah, just found a room in an SRO. The 3 dots of a reply being typed appeared for a long time. Julian can be so cruel. I didn't reply. Silence would be interpreted in the way most favorable to me. At 11 p.m., I turned off the light and lay down on the metal bed. The fan creaked. I closed my eyes. In my mind, I opened the invisible ledger from 8 years ago. On our wedding day, Julian had given me a supplementary card as if bestowing a great favor. Buy whatever you need for the house. If you need anything, just ask. I had replied with a tiny thank you. From that day on, every time I went grocery shopping, I skimmed a few dollars. A few tens of dollars each month, a few hundreds each year. I recorded everything. At night, I studied how to read financial statements. When he was asleep, I opened an account in the name of my friend Maya and learned to make slow but steady investments. I wasn't aiming for a jackpot. I needed to survive. A small noise from the hallway brought me back to the present. Someone passed by. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't afraid. The greatest fear of my life had been left behind in that penthouse on the river, along with the sound of Julian Croft's laughter. The next morning, I woke up early. I put on an old shirt and black pants, tying my hair back low. I went to a coffee shop at the entrance of the alley and ordered the cheapest iced Americano. I sat in a corner seat, took out a thin notebook, and wrote something down. To an outsider, it would look like an unemployed woman doodling aimlessly. No one would know I was drawing the cash flow chart of a company on the brink of collapse. My phone rang. It was Maya. Second call from the upstate client. Their tone is getting sharper. Good. The bank will send the delinquency notice on schedule. Got it. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. Julian hated bitter things. He liked things that were sweet and easy to swallow. That was his weakness. Ring, ring. A call from an unknown number. I answered. Evelyn Reed. Do you have a moment? We have an administrative position open at our company. The pay isn't great, but it's stable. I remained silent for 2 seconds. Then, in a voice mixed with gratitude and worry, I replied, Thank you. Could I have a little time to think about it? Of course. Take your time. I hung up. I knew this was the first fishing hook. A small, fragrant piece of bait tossed out to see if I was truly starving. I would bite. But not now. In the afternoon, I went back to my room, changed, and walked to the bus terminal. I stood there for a long time watching people come and go. My story of having nowhere to go needed more witnesses. I shed a few tears at the appropriate moment. In the evening, a text came from Julian. A single line. Have you come to your senses? I looked at the screen and smiled faintly. I replied, I need more time. 3 minutes later, he replied, Don't test my patience. I put the phone down. His patience was the most fragile thing in the world. I knew that. That night, I turned on the slim smartphone and sent a short email. No subject line. Just a single attached file, a risk analysis report on a real estate project near an industrial park. An analysis report I had been preparing for a very long time. The recipient was an address I had memorized for 2 years, but had never used. After sending it, I turned the phone off. The first gust of wind had blown, and tomorrow morning the color of Julian Croft's sky would begin to change. On the 3rd day after the divorce, I woke before dawn. The small SRO room was filled with a musty smell mixed with the lingering dampness of the overnight rain. I got up, opened the window, and took a deep breath. The early morning air of a poor alley had something raw and very real about it. It reminded me how far a person could fall if they didn't keep their wits about them. I washed my face with cold water and looked at myself in the small mirror on the wall. The mirror was cloudy, but the eyes within it were clear. Calm. There was no joy, no resentment, only the concentration of a person walking a tightrope. I had to maintain this rhythm. Every step now had to be precise. I put on an old shirt, slung a canvas bag over my shoulder, and went out to the alley entrance. A sandwich shop was just opening, so I bought the cheapest one and paid in cash. The owner gave me an extra packet of hot sauce and said, "This'll make you feel a little less miserable, miss." I nodded. What I needed wasn't comfort, but words like these that would help my story spread naturally. In alleys like this, rumors traveled faster than newspapers. I went to the same coffee shop as yesterday and sat in the same seat. I opened my notebook and wrote a few random lines, then erased them. In truth, I was waiting for a single phone call, and it came at the exact right time. It was Maya. "The bank sent the delinquency notice, Evelyn." "Good. Send a copy to him, but send it late, just before the end of business hours." The upstate client just texted again. They said if it's delayed 2 more days, they'll have to reconsider the contract. "Perfect. Don't reply." I hung up and took a sip of coffee. I imagined Julian sitting in a glass-walled conference room, tapping his fingers on the table, his voice louder than usual. He hated uncontrollable situations the most, and I was chipping away at that very control bit by bit. Around 10 a.m., the same number from yesterday called again. "Miss Reed, about that administrative position. If you're interested, you could come in this afternoon to discuss it." I paused for 2 seconds, then replied, "Yes, that would be fine. Thank you." I knew this wasn't a job offer, but a mirror. They wanted to see if I still had my pride. I would show them that I was desperate, but not debased. In the afternoon, I went to an office building in a commercial district downtown. The lobby was small, the elevator old. The interviewer was a middle-aged man with a monotonous voice. He looked at my empty resume and nodded. "It's been quite a while since you've worked." "Yes, I was taking care of my family at home." "And you're divorced now?" I lowered my head. "Yes." He looked at me more closely, as if weighing me on a scale. "The pay isn't great and the work is repetitive. Will you be okay with that?" I nodded, just fast enough to show eagerness, but slow enough not to seem too desperate. "I need stability." He smiled. The smile of a man who thinks he holds the weight on the scales. "All right, we'll be in touch." Leaving the building, I stopped for a few minutes. I knew someone would report to Julian that I was looking for a low-paying job and was ready to accept anything. I had to make him believe that. On the way back, I stopped at a small electronics store and bought a burner SIM card. When the owner asked what for, I just paid. He didn't ask any more questions and handed me the SIM. I needed another anonymous means of contact. Back in the SRO room, I locked the door, sat on the bed, and turned on the slim smartphone. There was a reply from the address I had emailed last night. No subject, just a single line. "Meet me at the park by the river tomorrow morning." I stared at the sentence. My heartbeat didn't change. He had taken the bait. But big fish always resist the hook. I had to be ready. That evening, Julian called. I answered after the 3rd ring. "What the hell have you been doing?" His voice was starting to get rough. I paused for a moment. "What do you mean?" "A delinquency notice came from the bank. The client keeps calling." "What have you been saying to people?" I smiled faintly and made my voice tremble. I haven't said anything." "I don't know anything about your business, Julian." He snorted. "Don't play dumb. I know you're not as simple as you look." I swallowed. "You're overestimating me." Silence. I could hear his breathing over the phone. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "I'll give you another chance to talk. I can even offer some support." Support, the word he had used with me for 7 years. I closed my eyes. I saw myself in the kitchen organizing ledgers by night. I need time to think. I'm not a patient man. I know. I hung up first. It was a small thing, but it was enough to make him uncomfortable. That night, I packed my suitcase again. I chose the most simple, clean, but inconspicuous clothes. I had to look like a woman who had just escaped a marriage. No accessories, no glamour. I put the old flip phone in an outer pocket and the slim smartphone in an inner pocket. The next morning, I arrived at the Riverside Park 15 minutes early. The sky was clear, the wind gentle. A man was sitting on a bench with his back to me. Good posture, white shirt, dark pants. As I approached, he turned. His eyes were sharp, but there was no suspicion in them. "Evelyn Reed." "Yes. And you're Daniel Sterling." I sat on the opposite bench. No handshake, no pleasantries. "Your analysis report was very interesting," he said. "Where did you get the data?" "From my life experience." He raised an eyebrow. "Do you know who you're messing with?" "I do." "And what do you want?" I looked him straight in the eye. "For the truth to come out, and I need a legitimate platform." He smiled faintly. And you think I'll trust you? You don't have to trust me right now. You just have to verify. I took a thin file of documents from my canvas bag and placed it on the bench. These are the discrepancies from the latest quarterly financial statement. This is the legal risk assessment for the property. And this, I paused, is the cash flow he thought no one would ever see. Daniel Sterling flipped through the pages wordlessly. The wind rustled the edges of the paper. Time passed very slowly. Finally, he looked up. You're calmer than I expected. I've waited a long time. He nodded. All right. I'll have my people verify this. But you should know once we start, there's no going back. I smiled. There has been no way back for me since the day he froze my accounts. We stood up. He handed me his business card. Wait for my call. I took the card without looking at it. I knew the game had moved to a new board. On the way back, the old flip phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Heard you met with a stranger. I didn't reply. I looked up at the sky. Clouds were gathering. The wind had changed direction, and though Julian Croft didn't know it yet, he was standing in the eye of a hurricane. By the time I left the park, the sunlight had grown more intense. The light reflecting off the river glittered like a thin blade. Daniel Sterling's business card felt firm and solid in my pocket, a token confirming the game had expanded. I didn't rush to call Maya. In certain moments, silence is the best way to maintain balance. I walked along the river path, blending in with the people out for their morning exercise, an old woman walking her dog children on bikes, middle-aged men jogging slowly. No one looked at me. I liked that feeling, to be invisible in a crowd, able to think without being watched. Back in my SRO room, I locked the door and drew the curtains. I placed the 2 phones on the desk and organized my papers. Each file had its purpose. I didn't allow room for emotion. Emotions were a rare luxury permitted only late at night when I was alone. During the day, I was an operator. At exactly 11 a.m., Maya called. Mr. Sterling's side has started their verification. They requested 2 additional sets of documents. Send them what we prepared. Nothing more, nothing less. One more thing, Maya lowered her voice. Julian just finished an internal meeting. I heard he got angry and slammed his fist on the table. I smiled. A predictable reaction. He always uses the sound of hitting a desk to hide his fear. I hung up and turned on my old laptop. The screen was a bit blurry, but it was good enough for writing. I logged into an anonymous email account and checked for replies. Nothing new. I knew people like Daniel Sterling wouldn't rush to respond. They needed time to confirm I wasn't just some reckless one-off actor. For lunch, I went down to the alley diner. The owner asked, "What'll it be today?" "Same as yesterday." The owner nodded and served the food. A man at the next table was talking loudly on the phone about loans and maturity dates. I overheard but didn't try to listen. At a time like this, such talk only reminded me of Julian's ragged breathing. After eating, I went back to my room and lay down for a while. I needed to conserve my energy. Waves would be coming in the afternoon. Around 3 p.m., the old flip phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "What are you doing?" I read it and didn't reply. 5 minutes later, he called. I answered. "I'm out," I said in a tired voice. "Where?" "Looking for a job." "A job?" He scoffed. "Where?" "Anywhere that pays a salary." He was silent for a few seconds. I could hear his breathing clearly. "Do you think you can live on that kind of pocket change?" "I don't have a choice." I made my voice sound almost tearful. "Please don't make things harder for me." He sighed, his voice softening. "Come back and talk. I can give you some money. Not a lot, but enough to live on." How much I asked, not because I needed it, but to test him. $30,000. I closed my eyes. $30,000. An amount he once spent on a deposit for a casual business dinner. I'll think about it. I won't wait long. I know. I hung up. My hand wasn't shaking. I knew he was losing patience, and when people lose patience, they make mistakes. Immediately, a text came from Maya. He just instructed his legal team to re-examine the marital assets. They won't find anything to claim. He's starting to suspect me. Let him suspect. I got up and opened the window. The sky was starting to cloud over. The clouds were thick and low. I liked afternoons like this. They weigh on people's minds and make them more likely to slip. In the evening, an email came from Daniel Sterling. A single line, "My office tomorrow 8:30 a.m. I replied briefly, "Understood." I knew this was the second stage of verification. If I passed, I would officially enter another space where law, money, and power conversed in a cold language. That night, I prepared meticulously. I didn't take too many documents, only the most essential ones. I had to prove that I knew where to stop. The next morning, I wore a simple white shirt, black pants, and flat shoes. I arrived at Sterling's office on time. The building was tall, the lobby spacious, the lighting white. I passed the reception desk and gave my name. An assistant led me to a small conference room. Daniel Sterling arrived 5 minutes after me. He placed a file on the table. We did a preliminary investigation. The problem is not small. He looked at me. There was no longer any suspicion in his eyes. What do you want from us? I want the truth to be laid on the table according to procedure. You know this will provoke a counterattack from him. I am prepared. Sterling nodded. All right. We will continue the in-depth investigation. During this period, you must not have direct contact with the target. Understood. One more thing, he added. You need a better cover. A legitimate position. I understand. Can you arrange that? It's possible, but you'll have to prove your capabilities. I smiled. I've been doing that for 8 years. He stood up and extended his hand. This time we shook. A brief, firm handshake. As I left the building, a text came from Julian. I'm coming to where you are tonight. I stared at the text. His loss of control was palpable in every letter. I replied, that would be uncomfortable. You're avoiding me. I'm just tired. The typing indicator appeared for a long time. I'll find you. I turned off the screen. I knew he would find me. And I knew that every step he took now was leaving a trail. I returned to my SRO and packed a small bag. Not to run, but to be ready. I looked around the small room. Suddenly it no longer felt like a temporary shelter. It was a transit station, a place where I had stood firm when everything else had collapsed. Outside, it started to rain. Heavy drops fell relentlessly. I sat on the bed, opened my notebook, and wrote a single line. Stage 2. The enemy reveals himself. I underlined it. This rain wouldn't just wet the streets. That night, the rain fell for a long time. I sat with my back against the wall, listening to the sound of raindrops on the tin roof. It was like a steady beat for the thoughts in my head. Julian said he would find me. I believed him. The man was not used to being rejected, especially not by me. Around 11 p.m., the old flip phone rang. I knew who it was without looking at the screen. I waited until the 6th ring before answering. Where are you? His voice was low but taut, like a guitar string pulled too tight. I'm resting. I said, where are you? At my SRO. Address. I remained silent. Long enough for him to think I was scared. Evelyn, he growled. Don't play games with me. What do you want? We need to talk. We're divorced. Being divorced doesn't give you the right to interfere with my business. I let out a faint laugh, just barely audible over the phone. I don't have that kind of power. He was silent. I could hear his breathing mixed with the sound of the rain. I'm nearby, he said. Open the door. I got up, went to the window, and looked down at the alley. A black car was parked at the entrance, its lights off. I knew he wouldn't come in. This neighborhood was different from the places he was used to. It's not a good time. I'm not asking for your opinion. Go back, I said slowly and clearly. Coming in here will only make things worse. Are you threatening me now? No. I'm advising you. I hung up. My hand felt a little warm, but it wasn't shaking. I knew that from this moment on, he would start doing foolish things. The next morning, Maya called very early. He's got people looking everywhere for you. Someone saw his car at the alley entrance last night. Good. Let people see him losing his mind. I had a cold sandwich for breakfast. I chewed slowly, looking out at the alley as it started to fill with people. Life here went on regardless of the storm brewing far away. Around 9 a.m., a call came from the bank. Miss Reed, we need to re-verify some information regarding your family's collateral assets. Okay, I replied in a moderately concerned voice. Is there a problem? There's been a request for additional documents from the co-guarantor. I knew who the co-guarantor was. Julian. I'll prepare them, I said, and hung up. I texted Maya. He started using my family. Should we intervene? No. Wait one more step. At lunchtime, I received an email from the HR department of the company from before. Miss Reed, we are pleased to offer you the position starting next week. I stared at the sentence, thought for a few seconds, and replied, Thank you. I accept. I needed this position not for the money, but because it would be the perfect piece in the picture of a fallen woman desperately clinging to anything. In the afternoon, I went to Daniel Sterling's office for a brief appointment. This time, it was a small office, not a conference room. He handed me a file. Second phase appraisal results. I scanned the numbers and read notes. Everything was as I had expected. He doesn't know yet, I asked. Not yet, but he will soon. Good. Sterling looked at me and said in a low voice, You need to be prepared. When this information leaks, he will use every means to fight back, including against your family. I am prepared. He nodded. We will maintain our distance until the right moment. You continue to live your life. I'm very good at that. As I left the office, a text came from Julian. You think you've won? I didn't reply. I knew that silence now would make him more anxious than any words. That evening, I returned to my SRO, changed, and lay down on the bed. My phone kept ringing. I turned off the ringer. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow would be a long day. The next morning, I started my new job. The office was small, the work simple. I worked very hard, very obediently. I wanted everyone to remember me as a kind, diligent woman. In the middle of the day, a text came from an unknown number. How long do you think you can hide? I knew it was Julian. He was using another SIM. I replied, You're scaring me. The typing indicator appeared. You should be scared. I put the phone down and took a deep breath. I could feel the net closing in. But I wasn't in the middle of the net. I was outside, pulling the strings. In the afternoon, Maya called. He just made a large abnormal money transfer. To where? To an intermediary company. Very hastily. I closed my eyes. He was digging his own grave. Should we block it? No. Let it go. In the evening, my mother called. Her voice was worried. Evelyn, someone from the bank, came by asking all sorts of questions. What's going on? Mom, don't worry. I'm handling it. Are you okay? I bit my lip. I'm fine. After hanging up, I sat for a long time. This was the only moment of the day I allowed myself to feel tired. But fatigue did not mean retreat. At night, I wrote another line in my notebook. Enemy begins to lose financial control. I underlined it. Outside, a car screeched as it sped up, and then stopped. I looked out the window. A familiar black car passed by the alley entrance. It didn't stop. Julian was running, and I was waiting. I woke up before my alarm went off. The SRO room was quiet, with only the regular whir of the fan. I got up and placed my feet on the cold tile floor. I could feel my heartbeat clearly. Not fast, not slow, the precise rhythm of someone accustomed to waiting. I made a cup of instant coffee and leaned against the windowsill, drinking it slowly. Down in the alley, people were starting their day, the sound of metal doors groaning open. It was a new day, and for Julian Croft it was another day to endure. I arrived at work earlier than usual. I had to create an image of stability and regularity. The divorced new employee. The person who worked hard without complaint. I turned on my computer and organized documents. The work wasn't difficult, but I handled it with extreme care. This diligence would be my armor. Around 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Maya. He just signed a short-term loan agreement. The interest rate is very high. How much? Almost 20 million. I closed my eyes for a second. In this situation, that amount was poison. Let him be. What assets did he use as collateral? Shares of a subsidiary. Good. I hung up and opened an Excel sheet. I added another line to my timeline. When someone starts using equity to cover a cash shortage, they have accepted the risk of losing control. Julian was sliding down a slippery slope. During work, a call came from Daniel Sterling. Can you talk for a few minutes? Our side has confirmed 2 more irregularities. We will be sending an official request for an in-depth audit. When? Around the end of the week. The rumors will arrive before the documents. I smiled. That was more than enough. Sterling hesitated. Are you all right? I'm fine. And your family? I've informed them in advance. He let out a small sigh. Good. We will support you from behind the scenes. After the call, I returned to my computer screen. My hands weren't shaking. Everything was proceeding according to plan. For lunch, I ate with my office colleagues. They talked about their kids, the cost of living rent. I listened, occasionally nodding. I didn't talk about myself. There was no need. The less people knew, the safer I was. In the afternoon, Julian called. I looked at the screen, hesitated for a second, and then answered, Where are you? At the office. The office. Yes. I'm working. He let out a dry laugh. What kind of work? In that tiny office. Work is work. We need to meet. I'm not comfortable with that. You're avoiding me. I'm not avoiding you. Then meet me. Calm down. My voice was soft. Not challenging. Calm down, he growled. You're ruining me. I was silent. Evelyn, he lowered his voice. How much do you want? I closed my eyes. This was the question I had been waiting for. I don't make deals. I'll give you 50,000. No 200. I smiled faintly. You think everything has a price? Don't be sanctimonious. I'm not. I'm just tired. I hung up before he could respond. Immediately, a flood of texts came through. I didn't read them. I turned off the screen. After work, I didn't go straight back to the SRO. I visited my parents in their suburban New Jersey home. I had to see them. I had to make sure they were safe. My father was sitting on the porch. He looked thinner than before. My mother was trimming vegetables and stood up when she saw me. Her eyes were red. You're here. We sat down. I told them only what was necessary, leaving out the details so as not to alarm them. Just be careful, my father said. You don't know what that man is capable of. I know. My mother took my hand. If anything happens, you come here. I nodded. I didn't say that it was for their sake that I couldn't back down. That evening I returned to my SRO room. My phone buzzed. A text from Maya. There are rumors in the industry that his company is undergoing an informal audit. He knows. Good. I opened my notebook and wrote another line. Enemy begins to panic. I underlined it twice. That night, I didn't fall asleep right away. I sat on my bed listening to the sounds of cars in the alley. Around midnight, there was a knock on the door. I got up without turning on the light. Who is it? Evelyn. Open the door. It was Julian's voice. Very close. I stood still. Go back. Open the door. You're scaring me. I'm not leaving. I took out my phone and dialed a number I had saved. I didn't need to make the call. Just lighting up the screen was enough. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. Silence. 1 beat. 2. You wouldn't dare. I dare, I said slowly and clearly. I heard rough breathing from outside the door, then the sound of footsteps retreating. I heard a car start and drive away. I sank onto the bed. My hands were a little cold, but my head was very clear. I knew he had just crossed a line, and every time he did, the evidence grew thicker. The next morning, vague articles about cash flow problems at a real estate company began to appear in online news outlets. No names were mentioned, but people in the industry would know. My phone kept ringing, but I didn't answer. I knew that from now on, Julian would no longer be in control. He would be reacting, and reactions in a state of panic always reveal weaknesses. I closed my notebook and prepared for work. Before leaving, I looked around the SRO room one last time. I had stood firm here when I was pushed to the edge of a cliff. Now it was my turn to move forward. That morning, I left the SRO with the clear sense that there was no turning back. Not out of fear, but because everything had passed the point of no return. The alley was the same, noisy, dusty, and people were still laughing, talking, and haggling, living their very ordinary days. I blended in with them, putting on the most ordinary appearance. Inside, however, all the gears began to turn faster. I arrived at work on time. 10 minutes after I turned on my computer, the office started to buzz. A colleague whispered in my ear, "Did you hear the news?" "What news?" "There's a rumor that a big real estate company is being investigated. They say it's chaos upstairs." I looked up, pretending to be surprised. "Really?" "Yeah. A friend who works at a bank said there's a problem with their cash flow." I didn't say more, just nodded. The fact that the rumor had reached the lowest-ranking employees meant that panic had set in on the upper floors. Around 10 a.m., the old flip phone rang. It was Maya. He's convened an emergency meeting with his lawyers. What did he ask? About you, Evelyn. He asked who you've been in contact with, who's behind you. No one could answer. I smiled. I hung up. I knew Julian was combing through every corner of his memory looking for anyone I might have relied on. But for the past 8 years, I had become very adept at making myself a non-entity. I ate lunch alone. I needed space to think. Daniel Sterling had said the rumors would precede the documents. And when the documents arrived, it wouldn't be a single blow, but a chain of attacks. I had to make sure I didn't step into the center too early. At 2 p.m. sharp, I received an internal email at work. It was an announcement for a short training course on financial processes. I signed up immediately. I needed to appear in multiple legitimate places, leaving a clear trail of work. During the training, my phone kept ringing, an unknown number. I didn't answer. Then a text came. "You think you're so smart." I didn't reply. Immediately another text came. "Don't provoke me." I placed my phone face down on the desk. I knew he was trying to drag me into an emotional conversation. I wouldn't step into that trap. After work, as I was leaving the front entrance, I saw a familiar black car parked across the street. My heart beat a little faster, but my face remained calm. I didn't look in that direction and walked straight ahead. The car door flew open. Evelyn. His voice called my name in the middle of the street, heedless of the surrounding eyes. I stopped and turned. "What are you doing here? Get in the car." He approached and blocked my path. His face was more gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, his collar askew. "Come with me. I don't want to make a scene." "You're the one making a scene right now," I said, just loud enough for him to hear. "Go back. You think your little act can fool me? I don't know what you're talking about." He sneered, but his smile was distorted. "Who did you meet? What did you send them?" I looked him straight in the eye. "You're scared, aren't you?" A second of silence. I clearly saw him flinch. "I'm not scared," he growled. "You're scared," I repeated in a calm voice. "That's why you're here." He reached out and grabbed my wrist. The grip wasn't strong, but it was enough to feel his loss of control. "Let go," I said. "Let me go." "Come with me," he hissed. I said, "Let go," I repeated louder this time. People around us started to stare. A security guard approached. "Is everything all right here?" Julian hesitated. I used that moment to pull my hand away. "It's nothing," I told the guard, "just an acquaintance who had a misunderstanding." The guard looked between us and nodded, but his eyes remained wary. Julian took a step back. "You think I'm just going to let this go? I don't care whether you let it go or not. You're going to regret this." I looked at him slowly. "You've said that before." I turned and walked away. This time he didn't follow. Back in my SRO, I locked the door and leaned against it for a few seconds. Not out of fear, but to confirm one thing. He had left a trail in front of witnesses. I turned on my phone and sent a short text to Daniel Sterling. Target approached and pressured me in a public place. Less than 10 minutes later, he replied. Noted. In the evening, Maya called. He's trying to get another loan, but many places are turning him down. The rumors are making his financials look bad. Good. Are you worried he'll do something drastic? I was silent for a moment. I am. That's why we have to be faster. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of Julian in the middle of the street, his unfocused eyes came to mind vividly. The man who once believed he could control everything was now consumed by his own panic. I opened my notebook and continued to write. Enemy begins making public mistakes through direct contact. I underlined it 3 times. Outside, the wind blew strongly and the windows rattled lightly. I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, the documents would arrive. And when they did, everything would no longer be just a rumor. The next morning, I woke up very early. Not because I had slept poorly, but because my body had grown accustomed to being one step ahead. Faint sunlight streamed through the SRO window, illuminating the small desk covered in notes. I made coffee and drank it slowly, rereading everything I had written over the past few months. Every timeline was matching up without a single error. That made me strangely calm. I arrived at work earlier than usual. The atmosphere today was completely different. People were gathered in small groups, talking in low voices or had their faces buried in their computers, but their eyes kept glancing outside. Around 9 a.m., all employees were instructed to remain at their desks. An internal email was sent out asking for cooperation with the audit team's work today. The atmosphere froze. I could clearly hear ragged breaths, the sound of chairs scraping. Some people stood up in panic, then sat back down. I didn't. I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. About 15 minutes later, a group of people entered. Dark suits, name tags clearly visible on their chests. No one said much, but their mere presence made the entire floor hold its breath. They went straight to the executive office area, and the glass doors closed. I kept my head down and worked as usual. Around noon, a text came from Maya. It started, I replied briefly. Proceed as planned. She sent a circle emoji. I understood. That lunch no one was in the mood to eat. I still ate my humble takeout meal. I chewed slowly. I felt not a sense of triumph, but a feeling like a very familiar emptiness. When a goal is within reach, a person is no longer excited. Only a cold composure remains. As the afternoon began, my phone rang. It was Julian's number. I stared at it for a few seconds, then answered. What have you done? His voice was hoarse, the familiar menace gone. I'm working. You think you've won? I don't play games of winning or losing. He let out a growling laugh. Don't be fake. You've driven me to this. You walked here yourself, I said. Do you think your threats can kill me? I think the law will be enough. A long silence followed. I could clearly hear his ragged breathing over the phone. What do you want? I closed my eyes for a second. I want you to stop. And don't touch my family. You think I have anything left to lose? You do, I said softly. Your last shred of dignity. He laughed, but the sound was broken. You were always so moral. No, I replied. I'm just different from you. I hung up before he could say more. As the afternoon wore on, information began to leak. Some financial news outlets published short articles using cautious language like allegations have been raised and are being verified, but for people in the industry, that was enough. Around the end of the workday, I was called into HR. Not because of me, but because of the entire department. They announced that some projects were being temporarily frozen and asked for employees' cooperation in providing information if necessary. I signed the confirmation form. My handwriting was very steady. As I was leaving the building, I saw Julian standing in the parking lot. He looked like someone who had been seriously ill. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes kept darting around. We need to talk, he said. Not here. I don't want you to cause a scene. He scoffed, but only for a moment. I've lost everything. You still have the right to cooperate. Easy for you to say. He approached me. Do you know what I used to think? That after the divorce you'd be completely lost. I looked at him for a long time. You were wrong. You never loved me. I did, I said. But love doesn't mean eternal endurance. He stepped back and leaned against a car. I don't understand. You don't need to understand, I replied. You just need to take responsibility. A man from his legal team approached and said something to him. Julian nodded and looked back at me. It won't be easy for you either. The same goes for you, I said. He got into his car and slammed the door. That night, I didn't go back to the SRO. I went to Maya's apartment. She opened the door and gave me a tight hug. Evelyn, are you okay? I'm fine. He's been called in for further questioning. I know. We sat on the floor and ate instant ramen. Outside the balcony, the city lights were bright. Maya looked at me for a long time. Do you regret it? I thought for a moment. No. Yeah. Then why do you keep going? I took a sip of water. Because if I don't do it now, I'll be tired for the rest of my life. That night, I slept very deeply. The next morning, the news broke officially. It was no longer vague. Julian Croft's name was mentioned, along with several project corruption figures. The comments flooded in. Some were sympathetic, some triumphant. I didn't read them. A text came from Daniel Sterling. Phase 1 complete, I replied, transitioning to Phase 2. In the afternoon, I met with my lawyer. He showed me the documents and explained each step. Everything was proceeding within the legal framework with no room for emotion. On the way back, I stopped in front of an elevator mirror. The woman in the mirror looked very different from the one 8 years ago. Not sharper, but clearer. In the evening, I called my mother. Mom, have you had dinner? Yes. Don't you worry. Is anyone bothering you? No. I'm doing fine. I was silent for a few seconds. I'm sorry for worrying you. Seeing you live well is what makes me happiest. I hung up and sat by the window. A gentle breeze blew the city, was still noisy, and life went on. I opened my notebook and wrote the last line for the day. Enemy begins to collapse from within. I underlined it. This wasn't the end. It was just the moment everything was revealed. And when the light shines, no secret can last for long. The night after the news broke, the city didn't change. Only the invisible currents beneath it moved more violently. I woke up early, washed my face with cold water, and looked in the mirror. The exhilaration of the first day when everything exploded had vanished, leaving only a sharp, cold composure. It was easy to make mistakes at this stage. People often mistakenly believe that a fallen man will not rise again. I knew Julian hadn't given up yet. He was never the type to quietly admit defeat. I went to my lawyer's office as scheduled. The lawyer, Daniel Sterling, had introduced me to a former judge named Mr. Davies, was a man of few words, but each word was concise and weighty. He handed me a thick file of documents. We will proceed one step at a time, he said. You don't need to be too involved. Let the documents speak for themselves. What about the assets? I asked. He's trying to overturn it, but the record of the account freeze and the pressure he applied after the divorce will work in your favor. I nodded. I didn't need to win quickly. I needed to win decisively. As I was leaving the lawyer's office, a text came from Maya. He's been called in for a second round of questioning. There's evidence of abnormal cash use. Document everything. There's something else. Maya hesitated. He called me. He called you. He asked about you. About what you might still have. I smiled. How did you answer? I told him I didn't know. Good job. I ate lunch alone. I skimmed a few lines of a newspaper article. Before long, Julian's name appeared more frequently, followed by speculative and analytical articles. I wasn't interested in what outsiders were saying. I focused only on the documents and the timeline. As the afternoon began, a call came from an unknown number. Evelyn Reed. My name is Jessica Hong. I'm an old friend of Julian's. I was silent for a second. What can I do for you? I'd like to talk to you for a moment. About what? About Julian. He's not in a good state right now. I looked out the window. That's no longer my concern. I know, Jessica sighed. But you were married to him. What do you want? A brief silence followed. He said if you drop the lawsuit, he'll compensate you. I let out a very small laugh. Please relay this to him, I said slowly. I will neither drop the suit nor accept compensation. Evelyn, you don't know what he's capable of. I am prepared. I hung up. I knew calls like this would continue. People would use affection, sympathy, and social pressure. I had come too far to turn back for things like that. Late that evening, I returned to my SRO room. I still hadn't moved out. I needed more time to quietly wrap everything up. A thin envelope was lying in front of my door. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a handwritten note in Julian's handwriting. Let's talk one last time. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Last time was a concept for people who held out hope. I was not one of them. That night, my father called. Some man came by asking about you. What kind of man? Said he was your ex-husband's friend. What did you say, Dad? I told him you weren't here. I closed my eyes. You did the right thing. Be careful. I know. After hanging up, I called Daniel Sterling. The other party has started using third parties. We anticipated that he replied. We have protective measures in place. Thank you. Remember, he added, do not engage with him personally. I won't. The next morning I went to work early. As soon as I sat down, HR called me in. The investigation team has a few more questions. I nodded and followed them into a room. Two men were sitting there. Their voices were calm. Miss Reed, you are Julian Croft's ex-wife, correct? Do you know anything about his personal cash flow? I was not involved. When did your marriage end? Recently. They took notes and asked a few more questions. I answered truthfully, without adding or subtracting anything. The truth, when spoken at the right time, was a very powerful weapon. Leaving the room, I let out a long sigh. Not out of fear, but because I knew that from now on, everything had moved to a different level. There were no more rumors or vague threats, only documents and the law. In the afternoon, Maya called. Her voice was low. He's been detained for the investigation. I was silent. Evelyn, are you listening? Yes. Am I okay? I'm okay. I got up and went out to the small balcony at the office. The sky was cloudy, but it wasn't raining. That evening, I returned to my SRO and packed my things. I no longer needed to be here. I had played my part. I looked around the room and touched the peeling wall with my hand. This place had watched me rise from nothing. I closed the door and left, pulling my suitcase behind me. I moved into Maya's small apartment temporarily. She made me tea and said, Evelyn, it seems like it's almost over. No, I replied. It's still the middle. What's left? Facing him. That night, I received a call from Mr. Davies, my lawyer. They've proposed a settlement for tomorrow. They're asking to ease the terms. My position is not to settle, I said. Please proceed as planned. The lawyer was silent for a moment. Understood. I hung up and sat by the window. The city lights were visible in the distance. I was neither happy nor sad. I just felt that I was on the right path. I opened my notebook and wrote another line. Enemy seeks an escape route, but permission is denied. I underlined it. Tomorrow I would face the past directly. Not to hold on, but to close the door. The morning of the day I had to face him came earlier than I expected. I woke up while the city was still dim. Sitting by the window of Maya's apartment, I watched the skyscrapers shrouded in a light fog. Previously, the mere thought of meeting Julian again would have made my chest tighten, but not this morning. Inside me, there was only a very quiet space like the surface of a lake after all the sediment has settled. Mr. Davies called at 7 a.m. I'll see you at the office at 9. The other party has confirmed their attendance. Okay. Remember, he added, do not answer anything unless I permit it. Understood. I hung up and got dressed. The dress I chose was a neutral color, not flashy, giving a neat and polite impression. I didn't want to stand out, nor did I want to look weak. I just needed to appear as a person protecting her legal rights after leaving a marriage fitting for my position. On the way to the lawyer's office, a text came from an unknown number. "Evelyn, it's me." I didn't reply. When the car stopped in front of the building, I took a deep breath. I had imagined this moment countless times, but reality was different. There was no thunder, no racing heart, just the step of my foot on the cold stone pavement. The mediation room was on the 5th floor. When I entered, Julian was already sitting there. He was noticeably thinner, and his eyes were not as sharp as before, but he was still trying to maintain his old confidence. Next to him sat a young lawyer with a nervous face. Julian looked at me for a long time. "You're here." I nodded without replying. I sat down next to my lawyer. Mr. Davies placed a file on the table and spread it out very calmly. The mediation began with familiar dry legal terms. I listened and answered when asked. Julian did not. He kept interrupting, trying to inject emotion into the narrative. "She knew the company's situation very well," he said. "She's not uninvolved." Mr. Davies looked at him straight. "Please present your evidence," Julian faltered. I'm telling the truth." "The truth requires evidence," the lawyer replied. I looked at Julian. At that moment, I clearly felt his powerlessness. Not because he was about to lose, but because, for the first time, he couldn't overwhelm someone with his voice alone. "It was my turn," Miss Reed, the mediator, said. "What is your desired outcome from this mediation?" "I want everything to be handled according to the law," I replied. "Nothing more, nothing less. If the other party shows good faith, would you be willing to withdraw some of your demands?" I shook my head. The room became quiet. Julian turned to me. "Do you really want to push me into a corner?" I looked at him very calmly. "You walked there yourself." The opposing lawyer whispered something to him. Julian closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. "If I accept the settlement, can you put in a few good words for me?" I tilted my head slightly. "Are you asking me for a favor now?" He forced a smile. "You were my wife." I was silent. In that moment, 7 years of memories flashed by quickly. The parties where I stood behind him, the moments I received living expenses from him, the nights he lectured me on life, and I just listened quietly. I let all of that go and said, "It is precisely because I was your wife that I cannot do otherwise." The mediation ended in an hour without an agreement. When everyone stood up, Julian blocked me at the door. "Evelyn," he said in a low voice. "I know I was wrong. But you didn't have to go this far." "You're mistaken," I replied. "I didn't go this far. I just stopped at the right time. You didn't give me a chance. I gave you 8 years of chances." He was silent. I passed him without looking back. Leaving the building, I felt a lightness. Not because I had won, but because the last string had been cut. In the afternoon, I met with Daniel Sterling as scheduled. He listened to my story and nodded. "The failure of mediation is a good thing," he said. "Now the paperwork will process faster. I just want everything to end cleanly." "It will," he replied. "But what will you do after that?" I thought for a moment. "I want to work." "Where?" "In a place where I can use what I know without hiding it." Daniel Sterling smiled. "I have a proposal." He handed me a job description. No fancy promises, just the title of Risk Analysis Consultant. "Consider it," he said. I took the paper. My mind was very calm. That night, I returned to the apartment and opened the window to let the breeze in. Maya looked at me. "How did it go?" "One part is over." "Are you sad?" I shook my head. A little regretful. Not for him, but for the years I was silent. Maya just poured more tea. At night, I opened my notebook and wrote slowly. Confrontation complete. No more emotional bondage. I underlined it and closed the notebook. Outside, the city was still bright, and life went on, and I had crossed to another shore. The next few days after the mediation flowed in a completely different rhythm. No more barrages of calls, no more texts that were half threat and half plea. This silence wasn't a terrifying void, but the quiet of a machine that had switched to autopilot. The documents had left my hands and were now moving straight along the cold orbit of the law. I just had to watch. There was no need to rush. I started my new job based on Daniel Sterling's offer. There was no welcoming party, no loud celebration. Just a small desk, a large monitor, and a pile of reports. I liked the simplicity. It allowed me to focus on what I did best, reading numbers and hearing the voices hidden behind them. The first morning, I arrived at work early. The office was still empty. I turned on my computer and scanned the risk analysis documents for a project in the review stage. I read very slowly, underlining discrepancies and making notes in the margins. No one knew how I used to work in the kitchen under a yellow light while Julian slept. As long as I knew that was enough. In the middle of the day, Daniel Sterling stopped by. "Are you getting used to the work?" "Very much so." He didn't ask more, just nodded. I liked the way he respected boundaries. No one here needed my life story. They wanted results. At lunchtime, Mr. Davies, my lawyer, called. "There's an update," he said. "The opposing party has filed a motion to amend some clauses in the documents. It's not significant, but it seems like an attempt to buy time. It's unlikely to succeed. I trust you, Mr. Davies. Please let me know if there's any progress." After hanging up, I returned to my monitor. Work helped me not to get distracted. It kept me upright. In the afternoon, Maya texted me. "He's under a lot of pressure. Some acquaintances asked about you. How did you answer?" I said, "You're working and not involved." "Good job." I knew that at this stage, public opinion would start to divide. There would be people who sided with me, people who sympathized with Julian, and people who were just curious. I didn't need to participate. My silence now was the best shield. In the evening, I returned to my apartment and prepared a simple meal. I ate slowly, listening to the sound of water boiling the knife, hitting the cutting board, very mundane sounds. I realized I hadn't cooked for myself with such a peaceful mind in a long time. In the past, meals were always connected to responsibility, to the gaze of evaluation. Not anymore. After dinner, I called my mother. "I started work. Is the job okay?" "It's fine. Take care of yourself." "I will." I hung up and stood by the window. Cars passed by on the street below. I no longer felt like I had to hide. I could stand anywhere with my own name and my own profession. Over the next few days, the rhythm of my life gradually stabilized. I went to work in the morning, left in the afternoon, and read or took notes in the evening. I no longer checked the news frequently. If something important happened, my lawyer or Daniel Sterling would let me know. One afternoon, Daniel Sterling called me into his office. "There's something," he said. "I'd like you to participate in the official review team for the next project." "What do I need to prepare?" "Just do what you've been doing." I nodded. I didn't ask why he trusted me. This trust didn't come from my divorce story, but from the analysis report I had submitted. That night, I received a text from a familiar number. It was Julian. "I have a court date soon." I stared at the text without emotion. "Just wanted you to know." I put the phone down. I didn't reply. A belated notification no longer had any effect. The next morning, I was invited to an internal meeting. It was a complex and high-risk project. I presented concisely and pointed out the areas that needed attention. The room was quiet. Daniel Sterling nodded. "This opinion will be included in the final report," he said. The meeting ended. A young colleague smiled at me. "You explain things very clearly." "Thank you." It was the first moment I was publicly acknowledged for my ability, not for a role related to someone else. In the afternoon, Mr. Davies called. "The trial date has been set." "When is it?" "Next week." "Do I have to attend?" "Yes, but it will be very brief." "Understood." I hung up and continued to work. I didn't allow emotion to interfere. I had learned that. The night before the trial, I didn't lose sleep. I organized my documents and prepared my clothes. I didn't wish for anything. I just wanted everything to proceed correctly. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse with my lawyer. The hallway was long, the lighting white. Julian was sitting on a bench opposite us. He looked at me. His eyes seemed tired. I gave a very polite nod of acknowledgement. The trial proceeded faster than I expected. The documents were clear, the evidence sufficient. When the judge read the verdict, I heard every single word very clearly. Not because it determined someone's fate, but because it confirmed that what I had gone through was not my imagination. As we were leaving the courtroom, Julian called my name. "Evelyn." I stopped. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. The apology was late, but not meaningless. It just no longer had any effect. "I accept it," I said. "But I'm not going back." He didn't say more, just nodded. I walked outside. The weather was clear. I took a deep breath. There was no applause, no dramatic moment. Just a conclusion that had found its rightful place. In the afternoon, I went back to the office and continued to work. Daniel Sterling saw me and said briefly, "Congratulations." "Thank you." That evening, I returned home and opened my notebook. I wrote the last line for Phase 2. Legal proceedings concluded. New life begins. I underlined it and closed the notebook. Outside, the city lights came on. I was no longer on the edge. I had stepped inside on my own 2 feet. After the trial, I didn't take a break. I knew one thing very well: when the door of the law closes, the door of real life opens. And that's when a person is most likely to lose their rhythm. I returned to the office as usual, relieved but not relaxed. The numbers on the screen were still cold and objective. They didn't care what I had been through. I liked that. Daniel Sterling gave me a new, more difficult and complex file. On the surface, it looked like a very good project. The expected return was high, the partners were reputable, and the press praised it. I read it line by line and soon found small cracks. Cracks that would become ruptures if not addressed. I made notes and sent back my opinion. Daniel Sterling replied briefly, "You've hit the core of the issue." I had lunch with my colleagues. For the first time, I participated in a common conversation without feeling like an outsider. They asked me about my way of seeing risk. I answered moderately. No one asked about my past marriage. Perhaps they knew but chose not to dig deeper. That respect made me feel like I belonged. In the afternoon, I went to the bank with my lawyer to finalize the last paperwork related to my parents' property. When the bank clerk stamped the last document, I let out a long sigh. The heavy burden that had been weighing on me was finally lifted. I called my father. "It's all over." On the other end of the line, my father's voice softened. "Good. Now, live for yourself." I hung up and stood in front of the bank's glass door watching people come and go. Countless lives brushing past each other, yet no one knew what wars they were fighting. In the evening, I returned to my newly leased apartment. It wasn't large, but it was bright and quiet. I cleaned it myself and organized every little corner. Putting everything in its place felt like reorganizing myself. I hung a small, simple painting. I didn't need much. That night, I had a strange dream. I was in the old kitchen of my former home, but no one was there. No voices, no gazes. I woke up and realized I no longer feared memories. Memories were now a part of me, not shackles. Over the next few days, I became busier. The work pushed me in a positive way. I started to lead small analyses and was asked for my opinion in meetings. I didn't talk much, but when I did, I was precise. Daniel Sterling noticed. One afternoon, he called me into his office. "Have you thought about going further?" "Further? Taking on more leadership. Leading a team." I was silent for a few seconds. "I need time. Don't rush," he said. "I just wanted to let you know that we're watching." I left the office. My mind was very calm. Recognition came at the right time, not too early, not too late. Maya came to visit me on the weekend. We cooked and chatted. She looked at me and smiled. "Evelyn, you've changed." "How so?" "You're lighter. You're not striving so hard anymore. Aren't you afraid that everything will collapse again one day?" "Everything can collapse," I said. "But this time I know I can get back up again." In the evening, I went for a walk alone. The city lights came on and the wind was cool. I saw busy restaurants, small families, young couples. I didn't compare. I just observed. Everyone had their own rhythm of life, and I was finding mine. A text came from an unknown number. I opened it. "Evelyn, I'll be abroad for a while." "It's Julian. Just wanted to say goodbye." I looked at the screen and thought for a long time, and for the first time in months, I replied, "Be well." Just that. Nothing more, nothing less. I put the phone down. I felt another door had closed. The next morning, I went to work early. I opened a report and started a new day. There was nothing pulling me back. The future was not yet clear, but it was no longer daunting. That evening, Daniel Sterling sent me an email. "Prepare the proposal for the next quarter. I want to list you as a co-author." I read that sentence several times. Not an assistant, not a background character, but a co-author. I smiled. That evening, I opened my notebook and wrote another line. No longer living to endure, but starting to live to build. I underlined it and closed the notebook. Outside, it was very quiet. I sat by the window drinking tea and let that quietness seep into every breath. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew I would walk forward on the very same 2 feet that had once trembled but had not collapsed. I started the new quarter with a completely different mindset. I was no longer someone on the fringes, no longer someone who had to prove her existence. I was a member of the team, and more importantly, a person with responsibility. Daniel Sterling put me in charge of the risk analysis for a large-scale infrastructure project in the Midwest. The sheer scale of this project would make anyone nervous. It was big long-term and involved multiple stakeholders. I knew this was not only a professional challenge but also a test of my courage. My team was small. The youngest was 26, the oldest 33. In our first meeting, they looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and appraisal. I didn't give a long introduction. I said only one thing: we work with data and responsibility, not emotions. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. I delegated tasks, listened to opinions, and asked questions. I didn't force. I guided them to see the problem from multiple layers. When the meeting ended, I knew I had chosen the right approach. Over the next few days, I worked more than usual. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I read reports late into the night, checking every assumption and every number. Sometimes I was tired, but it was the pleasant fatigue of someone who is building, not enduring. One afternoon, while I was revising an analysis report, Daniel Sterling stopped by. "Are you getting used to the new role?" "There's still a lot to learn." Good answer. He glanced at the draft on my screen. "What do you see as the biggest risk?" "It's not financial," I replied. "It's management. If we can't control the entangled interests, everything will slip." Daniel Sterling nodded. "Correct. Continue in this direction." I knew that trust was being built bit by bit, not through words, but through work. Meanwhile, my personal life also gradually stabilized. I got used to my small apartment and quiet evenings. I no longer checked my phone every time a strange text came. I no longer jumped at the sight of a familiar back on the street. My body had learned to relax again. One weekend evening, I went to my parents' place. A simple dinner: fish stew, steamed vegetables. My father asked about work, my mother about my meals. No one mentioned Julian. That silence was a gift. After dinner, I sat on the porch, listening to the sound of insects. My father poured me tea and said slowly, "You're doing well." I looked at my father. I just did what I had to do. Not everyone has the courage. I didn't answer. To be courageous or not is sometimes just a choice between hurting once or hurting for a very long time. Back in the city, I received an invitation to attend a professional seminar. Daniel Sterling suggested I present a small part. I hesitated, then agreed. Talking about risk and management in front of people was what I used to do quietly. Now I would do it publicly. On the day of the seminar, I wore a simple outfit and went on stage with a steady heartbeat. I didn't say much. I spoke clearly. I gave examples, analyzed, and concluded. When the presentation ended, the room was quiet for a few seconds, then applause broke out. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Afterward, a middle-aged man approached and shook my hand. A very realistic presentation. "I'd like to collaborate if there's an opportunity." I nodded. New doors were opening, not in a hurry, but surely. That night I came home very late. I sat by the window and opened my notebook. I no longer wrote about Julian. Now the entries were about work direction, things I wanted to learn. I realized that when a person doesn't look back, they naturally move forward faster. A week later, I received a call from Mr. Davies. "The case is completely closed." "Thank you. Would you like to hear about the other party?" "No, that's all right." The lawyer was silent for a moment. "You are one of the few people I've seen who can walk away from a case without holding a grudge." I smiled. Because a grudge is too heavy to carry. After hanging up, I felt a circle had closed. Not because I had won, but because I was no longer being dragged along. At the office, my team completed the first report. I submitted it to the management. Daniel Sterling replied the same day. "Good report. Proceed as proposed." I read the email. My mind was very calm. In the evening, Maya called. "Evelyn, you're so busy these days." "Yes. But you seem happier." "I am. Are you thinking about anything else? Besides work?" I thought for a moment. "Not yet. I'm learning to live fully on my own right now." Maya laughed. "That's more than enough." I put down the phone, turned off the light, and lay in bed. I didn't need to fill the void with someone else. I was filling it with myself. Before falling asleep, I opened my notebook again and wrote a short line, starting to stand at the center of my own life. I underlined it and closed the notebook. Outside, the city was sinking into the night. I closed my eyes and slept very deeply without dreaming. I knew I had come a very long way when one morning I woke up without reflexively checking my phone. Sunlight streamed into the small apartment and the wind gently rustled the curtains. I made tea listening to the sound of the water boiling. Everything flowed in a slow, precise rhythm. There was no bad news to wait for, no fear lurking behind every sound. That feeling was more precious to me than any victory. The work was entering its final phase. The Midwest project needed a final decision. I continued to review the details with my team. The meetings grew longer, the data sheets piled up. I was no longer standing behind someone's back. I stood in front of the whiteboard pointing out risk factors. When there were opposing opinions, I listened and countered with data. I didn't need to raise my voice. I let the numbers speak for me. One late afternoon, Daniel Sterling asked me to stay after work. The conference room was empty, the lighting soft. He looked at me for a long time. Are you ready for the next step? What step? To take on greater responsibility. To officially lead the project. I was silent. Not because I hesitated, but because I knew this answer would change many things. I am ready, I said. Daniel Sterling nodded. Then starting next week, you are the team lead. I stood up and bowed my head slightly. Thank you. No need to thank me. You earned it yourself. Leaving the conference room, I walked very slowly. The image of myself 8 years ago came to mind. The woman standing in the kitchen receiving money for groceries, hiding loose change in her pocket. I no longer blamed that past. Without those years, there would be no me today. On the weekend, I went to visit my parents in the countryside. This time, I didn't bring any worries. I brought peace. My father was fixing the fence my mother had planted, a few more flower pots. I helped my mother water the plants and listened to stories about the neighbors. Small stories that had nothing to do with money or fame. I suddenly realized that happiness is sometimes just being fully present where you belong. In the evening, my father asked, "Are you thinking about getting a house?" "I'm thinking about it. Don't rush. As long as you have a place to come back to." I nodded. I started my new quarter with a very different mindset. I was no longer someone on the fringes, no longer someone who had to prove her existence. I was a member of the team, and more importantly, a person with responsibility. Daniel Sterling put me in charge of the risk analysis for a large-scale infrastructure project in the Midwest. The sheer scale of this project would make anyone nervous. It was big, long-term, and involved multiple stakeholders. I knew this was not only a professional challenge, but also a test of my courage. My team was small. The youngest was 26, the oldest 33. In our first meeting, they looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and appraisal. I didn't give a long introduction. I said only one thing. We work with data and responsibility, not emotions. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. I delegated tasks, listened to opinions, and asked questions. I didn't force. I guided them to see the problem from multiple layers. When the meeting ended, I knew I had chosen the right approach. Over the next few days, I worked more than usual. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I read reports late into the night, checking every assumption and every number. Sometimes I was tired, but it was the pleasant fatigue of someone who is building, not enduring. One afternoon, while I was revising an analysis report, Daniel Sterling stopped by. "Are you getting used to the new role? There's still a lot to learn." Good answer. He glanced at the draft on my screen. "What do you see as the biggest risk?" "It's not financial," I replied. "It's management. If we can't control the entangled interests, everything will slip." Daniel Sterling nodded. "Correct. Continue in this direction." I knew that trust was being built bit by bit, not through words but through work. Meanwhile, my personal life also gradually stabilized. I got used to my small apartment and quiet evenings. I no longer checked my phone every time a strange text came. I no longer jumped at the sight of a familiar back on the street. My body had learned to relax again. One weekend evening, I went to my parents' place. A simple dinner: fish stew, steamed vegetables. My father asked about work, my mother about my meals. No one mentioned Julian. That silence was a gift. After dinner, I sat on the porch listening to the sound of insects. My father poured me tea and said slowly, "You're doing well." I looked at my father. I just did what I had to do. Not everyone has the courage. I didn't answer. To be courageous or not is sometimes just a choice between hurting once or hurting for a very long time. Back in the city, I received an invitation to attend a professional seminar. Daniel Sterling suggested I present a small part. I hesitated, then agreed. Talking about risk and management in front of people was what I used to do quietly. Now I would do it publicly. On the day of the seminar, I wore a simple outfit and went on stage with a steady heartbeat. I didn't say much. I spoke clearly. I gave examples, analyzed, and concluded. When the presentation ended, the room was quiet for a few seconds, then applause broke out. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Afterward, a middle-aged man approached and shook my hand. A very realistic presentation. I'd like to collaborate if there's an opportunity. I nodded. New doors were opening, not in a hurry but surely. That night, I came home very late. I sat by the window and opened my notebook. I no longer wrote about Julian. Now the entries were about work direction, things I wanted to learn. I realized that when a person doesn't look back, they naturally move forward faster. A week later, I received a call from Mr. Davies. The case is completely closed. Thank you. Would you like to hear about the other party? No, that's all right. The lawyer was silent for a moment. You are one of the few people I've seen who can walk away from a case without holding a grudge. I smiled. Because a grudge is too heavy to carry. After hanging up, I felt a circle had closed. Not because I had won, but because I was no longer being dragged along. At the office, my team completed the first report. I submitted it to the management. Daniel Sterling replied the same day. Good report. Proceed as proposed. I read the email. My mind was very calm. In the evening, Maya called. Evelyn, you're so busy these days. Yes. But you seem happier. I am. Are you thinking about anything else? Besides work? I thought for a moment. Not yet. I'm learning to live fully on my own right now. Maya laughed. That's more than enough. I put down the phone, turned off the light, and lay in bed. I didn't need to fill the void with someone else. I was filling it with myself. Before falling asleep, I opened my notebook again and wrote a short line. Starting to stand at the center of my own life. I underlined it and closed the notebook. Outside, the city was sinking into the night. I closed my eyes and slept very deeply without dreaming. I woke up one morning no longer reflexively checking my phone and realized I had come very far. Sunlight streamed into the small apartment, and the wind gently rustled the curtains. I made tea listening to the sound of the water boiling. Everything flowed in a slow, precise rhythm. There was no bad news to wait for, no fear lurking behind every sound. That feeling was more precious to me than any victory. The work was entering its final phase. The Midwest project needed a final decision. I continued to review the details with my team. The meetings grew longer, the data sheets piled up. I was no longer standing behind someone's back. I stood in front of the whiteboard, pointing out risk factors. When there were opposing opinions, I listened and countered with data. I didn't need to raise my voice. I let the numbers speak for me. One late afternoon, Daniel Sterling asked me to stay after work. The conference room was empty, the lighting soft. He looked at me for a long time. Are you ready for the next step? What step? To take on greater responsibility. To officially lead the project. I was silent. Not because I hesitated, but because I knew this answer would change many things. I am ready, I said. Daniel Sterling nodded. Then starting next week, you are the team lead. I stood up and bowed my head slightly. Thank you. No need to thank me. You earned it yourself. Leaving the conference room, I walked very slowly. The image of myself 8 years ago came to mind. The woman standing in the kitchen receiving money for groceries, hiding loose change in her pocket. I no longer blamed that past. Without those years, there would be no me today. On the weekend, I went to visit my parents in the countryside. This time, I didn't bring any worries. I brought peace. My father was fixing the fence, my mother had planted a few more flower pots. I helped my mother water the plants and listened to stories about the neighbors. Small stories that had nothing to do with money or fame. I suddenly realized that happiness is sometimes just being fully present where you belong. In the evening, my father asked, "Are you thinking about getting a house?" "I'm thinking about it." "Don't rush, as long as you have a place to come back to." I nodded. The city felt different when I returned. Not more intimidating, but more like a place where I could build things. My place, my work, my life. My promotion was announced quietly. I didn't receive a grand celebration, just a new office and a larger team. The first thing I did was hold a one-on-one meeting with each team member. I listened to their ideas and their difficulties. I wanted them to know that this was our team, not my team. The project was successful. We identified the risks early and proposed a solid management plan. Our final report was adopted without any changes. On the day the project officially launched, Daniel Sterling sent a bottle of champagne to my office with a simple note, "To new beginnings." That evening, my team had a small dinner. We laughed and talked. I watched them and felt a quiet joy. This was the result of building, not destroying. That night, I stood by my apartment window for a long time. The city lights spread out like a galaxy. I opened my notebook. The pages were almost full. I wrote the last sentence on the last page. I am here. I didn't underline it. There was no need. I closed the notebook. It had served its purpose. I no longer needed to record every step to prove I was alive. I was just living. The past was a scar, but it was also a map that had led me here. I put the notebook away in a drawer. Outside, the city was quiet, and I was at peace. A deep, solid peace that I had built with my own 2 hands.